Closing out the opening segment of today's summit will be Guy Faulkner. Guy has been editing and publishing agricultural journals for more than 40 years. He joined publishing company Agri Europe in 1970, becoming a director and launching the weekly Potato Markets newsletter in 1976. In 2011, he teamed up with agricultural journalists Cedric Porter and Anna Lambert to form Agri Markets Limited. They launched the weekly World Potato Markets on February 1 of that year and also publish an annual 110-page potato market and trade review. World Potato Markets provides a growing number of global subscribers with essential weekly information on European and world potato areas, yields, and production. It also monitors the volume and value of world trade in potatoes, potato products, particularly fries, chips and flakes, and seed potatoes. Each issue includes reports and comments on the latest European physical market and future market prices. Please welcome Guy Faulkner.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak, to come across to talk to you, and also for holding this event in Las Vegas. It's a place for which I have great affection, because I was first here in 1964 when I was bumming around with two of my ag student friends, and we came here and there was one long street and 6 casinos. At the end of the street, back in the desert. And we had a serious car breakdown in the desert, and the local population saved our lives, so I have a great affection for here. Now then, how do we operate these things? Right, this is, I'm going to talk about European production. Where do we go? Well, very, very nice introduction. I think we can skip the advertising bit here and get straight into the what is happening in Europe. Now, the potato area has fallen, as you can see from the line in the chart. It's fallen over the past 16 years. But the decline in production has been slightly less because yields have been increasing. Well, okay, so this is a global story, but in fact, there's been a complete upheaval in European production. What has happened? So firstly, there's a collapse. The EU is now 28 countries, including Eastern European countries who joined in 2004, so such as Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia. Now these countries, they used to grow huge. It started with East Germany actually in 1990, that they used to grow huge volumes of potatoes for feeding to hogs. And in Poland, they used to grow 30 million tons of them, and the amount of potatoes reaching the market when production was 30 million tons was about 4 or 5 million tons actually got to the market. Last year's production in Poland was 6.7 million tons. How much potatoes reached the market? 4 million tons, exactly the same, hasn't changed. So they fed huge amounts of potatoes to hogs. And industries were absolutely transformed as they moved to a market-based economy. And also there's huge use for seed. They saved their own seed, of course. Now, I'm just showing this chart. This is the second factor that has transformed production. There's been a huge concentration of production away from the peripheral EU 28 countries into Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, France, and UK. But it's not just those countries. It is the area shown in the chart. It's northwest Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, northeast France, and southeast UK. That's where the huge concentration of production has been. Why? Now, the 5 countries that I've been talking about, they accounted for 63% of the expected 2015 harvest. This is the yield, the average yield of potatoes. This isn't the right chart. I do apologize. This isn't the right chart. I'm sorry. But what should have been shown is the fact that in the 5 central countries, the yields have been static at about 45 tons a hectare. In the 10 peripheral countries of the former, like Austria, Ireland, Denmark, the yield is around 30 tons a hectare, and in the new member states, it's only 20 tons a hectare at the moment. So the third factor behind this concentration of production is the much higher yields that you get. So this is what has been happening in the production, is that you've got the 5 central countries that I've been talking about. The production is virtually static. In the 10 countries of the old 15, there's gradual decline, but there's been absolute plunging production in Eastern Europe, in the Eastern European countries, and it's still continuing. The third factor is demand changes. You'll be addressing this here, I'm sure, but they decline everywhere in fresh consumption, and there's concern in Europe, what can we do to arrest this decline? And the best that can be done, I think, is you can just hold it and level it. That's about the best you can do, because the demand is for potato products, and particularly fries. Now, this is the value of world potato trade for about 75 countries in 19. This is export data for 75 countries. These figures are in euros. So you've got a total value of ware potatoes and products. Total value is 9.1 billion euros. The dollar is not far away now, so $10 billion. But of that, fries account for more than half, $4.7 billion. So fries are the biggest sector by far. And chips and dehydrated are 1.7. Now, ware potatoes, the ware trade can be big in some years, small in others. It's opportunistic according to regional shortages and surpluses. And also, below the line is trade in seed potatoes. That's quite a big item. Sorry. Let's get back to where we are. Sorry about this. So sorry. Right. Let's do it one at a time now. Okay, so this is how the potato exports have grown over the recent years for the same 75 countries. And you can see that the growth in products, the product value is so much greater, and the ware, what I call ware, you call fresh potatoes, I'm not quite sure what word I should be using here, but it varies. In 2010 and 11, world trade was galvanized by the appalling Russian harvest, and there was a burst-in wear trade. Is it possible to have a glass of water? So product trade, you can see that the values if you convert that per ton traded, that the value is so much higher than fresh potato value, and the fresh potatoes, the fluctuation as a percent is much greater, wider fluctuation from year to year. So thank you. So if you're investing in a processing plant, where would you locate it? As far as I can see, the yield threshold is about 40 tons per hectare. And in practice, the world market's dominated by North America and the EU5. This is world potato production and yield. You can see the yield there. There's only 3 areas where you can get a yield of more than 40 tons a hectare. That's the EU5, that's North America, and Oceania, that's Australia and New Zealand. But Australia has water problems, and New Zealand is a tiny country, and there's limited potential there. And in the EU, it's the Netherlands and Belgium which are dominant. Germany, France and the UK have large fresh markets, but they also have processing plants. But the Dutch and the Belgians are the real professionals on the processing side. The Belgians go for the low end of the market. Their production and exports have really rocketed over recent years, and they now export 2 million tons, whereas much more than the Netherlands, whose growth has been relatively slow in volume. But if I can get to the value chart, you'll see that the Netherlands value is 1.2, close to 1.2 billion euros a year, similar to Belgium. So that's very valuable fry trade, 1.2 billion euros each. But the Dutch and Belgians, they're at their production limits because they are now the largest world net importers of fresh potatoes, and almost all these imports are for processing. They need it for processing. You can see the Russian effect for the Russian demand in 2010 and 11, where they imported 1.65 million tons. So it's opportunistic ware trade, fresh potato trade. The leading net exporters of ware potatoes in the world are France and Germany. And there are some new countries joining the list, like Egypt, and that's because Russia banned imports of fresh potatoes from the EU, and Egypt stepped into the breach. But now it's likely to be leveling off that trade because they've had payment problems over the past year. And as you can see, China, Iran, and India are also becoming significant exporters. This is exports by the 5 countries of fries. And you can see that although the 5 countries, they've been expanding their exports outside the EU, it's been growing quite fast. The real sales are within internally EU countries. And this is up to September, these figures. There's always a delay in the publication of the EU trade statistics. But while the sales outside the EU have been growing, recent months it's fallen off a bit. And thankfully, the home market sales have held up. So that's exports of chips and crisps. What we in the UK call crisps, everybody else calls chips. Despite the world recession, they have been steadily growing. This category, which includes chips, there are other products in that sector. They have fallen off in volume recently, but the value has been maintained. So the price per ton has increased, and so the buyers have been paying more per ton for it. So the value is sustained. And seed exports are worth 700 million. They're far from insignificant. But the world trade is absolutely dominated by the Netherlands. They export 700, 800,000 tons a year. And they account for more than 50% of world trade. France, Egypt, and the UK export more than 100,000 tons, but Egypt is very erratic, and the statistics I find some of them a bit doubtful. Germany, Canada, Belgium, Denmark export more than 50,000 tons. Now, I'll just go through what I see as the production trends for the 5 central countries. You can see that the Dutch, well, I'm dealing here, there is a starch industry. Potatoes are grown for starch in the EU. That accounts for about 6 million tons. But that's not really relevant for the human consumption processing sectors. So this, for the Netherlands, the EU, the area, is pretty static. It hasn't changed much, and I'm not expecting much change this year either. And the ware yield is slightly upwards. So I've put in the forecast for 60 for this year according to the medium-term trend. In Belgium, there's been a terrific expansion, right from 50,000 hectares up to, they jumped up to 65,000 hectares, and is, despite a setback in 2012, they've come up again, and we're now about 70,000 hectares of ware potatoes. That's mainly grown for processing, and you can see the response to price when there's a shortage. Ware yields in Belgium have been going up, and they were very heavy in 14, came back a bit last year, and according to the trend, they should be down again, but possibly that might be an underestimate. They might be able to achieve 50 tons a hectare. For comparison, the Idaho average is about 45, 46 tons a hectare, for comparison, and the Washington yields are right off the clock at 60, 66 tons a hectare, for comparison with these figures. In France, the area is bigger, but the fresh potato sector is more important. Because, as I said earlier, they're the largest exporters of fresh potatoes in the world. There, the ware area is likely to be around 120,000 hectares this year. The yield trend is again flat, and I've put in a trend figure here so that you can see what. In Germany, it's in decline, slight decline in area, but yield has been increasing, and so to about 48 tons a hectare. Now in the UK, it's in decline, and I really don't fully understand why. Our costs of production are high. This is one reason. Our farmers, we grow about 1.8 million tons for processing, but the fresh market is the most important, and farmers will try to go for the fresh market. They regard the processing sector as a sort of secondary outlet for their potatoes, which may be one of the problems that accounts for the decline. There was an absolutely disastrous harvest in 2012, and huge amounts of potatoes were imported. But the picture of decline is likely to continue. So this is the overall picture for the 5 countries. We had a big crop in 2014, and prices were very low. The yields came back last year, and production was down, and prices in this current season, that's prices for 2015-16, are at a sort of good average level, and are likely to, will result in the slight increase in production that I'm putting in the 5% figure according to those forecasts which I've already set out. So, to summarize, I'm expecting the concentration of production in the centre to continue. There will be increasing emphasis on product output, and this is where the Netherlands and Belgium will maintain their dominance, but they are at their production limits. They're growing potatoes one in 3 years, and they're having to import to sustain their expansion. In the EU, the prices for table potatoes are higher than for processing, but there are very high retail standards, and it must be the same here, I'm sure, that visual appearance is very important and difficult to produce. More than 50% of the processing crops are grown under contract. And in the Netherlands, for example, a typical contract would be a fixed price for 40 tons per hectare. The producer will almost certainly produce more than that, 50 or even 60 tons a hectare. The processor then undertakes to buy from the grower the surplus tonnage, but he will pay the day price for it, what is, the spot price. And farmers will take this up because often they would have a difficulty in finding alternative outlets. So if you have a high percentage of potatoes grown under contract, which is more than 50% now, what are the markets, the so-called market prices? What are they? They're a sort of dumping ground for surpluses, and they're more volatile and less reliable as market indicators. So it's one thing that you have to bear in mind when you're looking at market prices. Processor strategy, they want to avoid entering the markets, they want to keep the prices down, but they come unstuck in years of regional shortages when export markets provide competition for supplies. And this year, for example, last year, for example, the crops in the south of Germany were very poor. There was very hot summers in south of Germany, into Switzerland, in fact, and round the eastern countries and up into Poland. So there are traders are confident that export markets will improve. At the moment, they've been using their own supplies. The storage facilities in these countries are not brilliant, so they last up till the end of the year. Then in the new year, they'll start looking for imports, and there are signs that this is happening. So processors might not have everything their own way in coming months, although I'm sure that they've already taken this into account. So for European processors, for European growers, well, the industry, in fact, this year is, for once, it looks like being a good average season, because you either have surpluses where the prices are right on the floor, or you have shortages where they're in the sky. And this looks to be a much better season where growers will get an adequate return, and the prices are not so high that it's okay for the buyers as well. So that's my conclusion. So thank you very much. Have I time for questions or anything? Yeah. Okay. Is there anything anybody would?
I have two questions. One, why do you think Europeans are eating less fresh market potatoes? And two, has the neonic ban?
Sorry? Why are they eating less potatoes?
Why are they eating less potatoes? And has the neonic ban hurt your yields? Are growers complaining about that?
The what ban?
Neonic insecticides like platinum, aren't they banned in Europe?
Yes, I'm not a great expert on the pesticides, but the fresh consumption, surely it's a factor here as well, isn't it? That everybody is talking about, shall we spend money on promotional campaigns? It's and there are several starting this season, but whether they will bear any fruit, I'm a bit doubtful, because I think, you know, it's one of these fundamental things that it's a terrific difficulty to do anything about it. It's a long-term trend, and it's there, and very difficult. Yeah, sorry. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much.